What's going on? And welcome back to another episode of the Court Storm College Hoops Talk podcast, which you can find right here on the Court Storm Media Network. My name is Kanaye, and I'm joined here with my co-host Josh. And it's been a little while since we've seen you guys on this podcast. It's been busy, of course, with finals and everything that goes down when you are in school. A lot to talk about since the last time we uploaded on this podcast. Michigan ran through the Players Era tournament and looks like one of the best teams in the country. Iowa State has also gone on a run as well, still one of the few undefeated teams remaining. Duke has played really well. We've seen a lot of big time games played between Players Era, Feast Week overall, the ACC SEC Challenge just yesterday at the Jimmy V Classic. So we're going to go over our takeaways from a lot of those events. We'll talk about some teams that have kind of struggled lately, some teams that have been surprises, as well as give you guys our updated Final Fours. But before we get into all of that today, please engage with the videos you see on this podcast or anywhere else on this channel in any way you can, whether it's liking, subscribing, or just telling other people about the Court Storm podcast. Turn on post notifications as well so you are the first to our newest videos. Everything just goes a long way with influencing YouTube's algorithm and getting more people to see what we put out. So let's get right into it. I think a good place to start is the AP poll. A lot of movement going from into this week as opposed to last week. Josh, I'll ask you first. But what are the teams that really catch your eye in the poll this week?
I think I could name a few, but the big ones have been the top risers, that being Michigan and Iowa State. They've now ridden into 2 and 4 respectively. These have been probably the biggest success stories going into and out of Feast Week. Obviously, as we'll talk later on both of their performances, but I got to give it to, honestly, Michigan first. They've really shocked, I think, most of the college basketball world, being very close with TCU and Wake Forest to start the year did not look good. They were really falling into that, early season rumor that they were not going to be as good as originally advertised. And while that has stayed true with a player like Yaxel Lendenberg, the rest of the team has stepped up consistently. That dominant big three, big time lineup of Mara, Lendenberg, and Morris Johnson is disgusting. It's basically unstoppable. And for the past 4 games, including their 3 games of Players Era where they won the Players Era championship, they have been blowing out opponents by 30 plus points. It is just absolutely nasty, and there's no better way to say it, but most teams should be terrified of what Michigan can do. And then for Iowa State's purposes, insane win in Mackey. I actually went to that game. Ryan Hammer went to that game too, so this was a very big time matchup. Heck, Talburn was there too, now thinking about it.
Really?
Yeah, he was, yeah. And Iowa State blew the doors off. It is currently the biggest home loss in non-conference history for Purdue and the largest non-conference home loss for a number 1 overall team at any point. That is just wild to say out loud, and it happened before our eyes just a few days ago, and they both kind of worked their way into 1 seeds right now.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of points with both Michigan and Iowa State. I'll start with Michigan since you did. And Michigan looks like the best team in the country right now. In terms of the fashion in which they've won their games, I think their last 5 games, their average margin of victory was something close to 35.5 points, which of course is just tough to really fathom. I've seen even college basketball accounts put out petitions to drug test the entire Michigan basketball program, which is pretty funny. But I just think that their early games, which they kind of struggled in, the games against TCU and Wake Forest, I just don't think that they were fully there yet. I think a lot of it was they have a lot of new pieces that are still trying to figure out exactly how to run what Dusty May wants offensively. And per KenPom, they are the number 1 defensive team in the country. I just think they have great size in that front court. You mentioned 3-headed monster between Merez, Ademara, and Yaxel. And Yaxel looks like a National Player of the Year candidate still. Doesn't need to score the way we thought he was going to have to going into the year, which I think is really important. But the shooting, I think, has by far been the biggest surprise. They got inconsistent shooting over that 5-game span going back to Players Era, and then the 2 games following between guys like LJ Case and Amari Burnett, Roddy Gale. Ellie Cadeau even last night had a really great shooting night. I think he finished with 18 points, hit 4 threes in that game against, forget exactly, it was Villanova they played. So I think that's really important. I do slightly worry that maybe Michigan is peaking just a little too early at the wrong time as opposed to further down the road, but nonetheless, I do still think that there is room to grow in terms of the guard play from Elliott. I still think that Michigan can be turnover prone, and I don't know if I believe on this shooting success. I don't know if it's sustainable long term over the course of the entire season, but they've looked really good. Same thing goes with Iowa State. That win at Mackey against Purdue might be the best win in the country this year, arguably, up to this point. saying that they legitimately have three All-American candidates between Tom and Lipsy, Joshua Jefferson, and Mopsilovich. So those three, that's a tough tandem to go really go against, and they obviously play Iowa State defense. You know, TJ Otzelberger runs his program, and offensively they don't look as limited as perhaps they were at times last year. And I think Taman Lipsey has definitely took a step forward where he kind of took a step back last year.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree on that point. Honestly, the whole idea of any team this year having three All Americans was actually probably going to be Purdue between TKR, Braden Smith, and possibly Oscar Clough. That is still theoretically on the table, but right now, Iowa State has won that battle, and it's very surprising to see that. At least in my opinion, I feel like out of the Big 12 teams that everyone was naming, Arizona, Houston, BYU, I feel like those were that three teams. Iowa State has, not too unsurprisingly, snuck their way into that conversation, and the Big 12 this year will be a gauntlet. There's a good chance we get two number one seeds in the Big 12, but whoever wins this conference will be a legitimate title threat.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Players Era overall. Of course, we mentioned Michigan completely thrashed every opponent they played. They beat Auburn. They beat Gonzaga, who was my pick to win the Players Era tournament by 30. I think they won every game in that tournament by 30 plus. So just really incredible to see out of a Michigan team that a lot of people had questions about going into that tournament, considering some of their closer games that they've played leading up to it. Overall, I think the Players Era Festival had a lot of great games, but I think what stuck out to me was just really the lack of showing from the fans there. I was really surprised. I think that there's in a tournament that is completely NIL based and really for the players and trying to produce as much revenue as possible. It was a little surprising to see. I don't love the formatting of it, especially just considering you had several teams go undefeated, Kansas being one of them, Iowa State being one of them. And those teams don't get to play in any form of a championship game. And it's really solely relying upon win margin. And I think that I'd rather see a more traditional bracket in the Players Era Festival going forward.
Yeah, it is a definite assumption that one of these teams, and it really could expand on that as time goes on, that one of these teams will be a possible team playing in Indianapolis
Right.
this squad. And on the players era stuff alone, I thought it was nice. Everyone has their concerns about, is it going to be the next big thing in the future? If you don't know, there's going to be 32 teams next year, and I'm slightly concerned about how they're going to do that with bracketing. We're not really so sure if they're going to have a full-time bracket or if they're going to do what they did last year or this year, where they had a system where the team that had the most points added up in their two wins would go and play the other team with the second most. I was not a big fan of that at that time because Iowa State had great wins and was forced to play in that non-third place game against Syracuse, which they blew them out for. And I think on the point of the field as well, because I do want to mention that too, I felt that the field was a little bit underwhelming at times.
Yeah.
Like, there are good teams. Iowa State's great. Houston's great. St. John's has its moments, but half the team wasn't tournament ready. Notre Dame, Syracuse, Rutgers, UNLV, San Diego State, Oregon, Creighton, half the field just could not keep up, and it led to a lot of uncompetitive ball, which is a shame.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because this has definitely been a MTE that's really been heavily pushed, especially over the last 2 years, just with the introduction of having more of an incentive for the players and the programs to receive NIL winnings if they are able to win the Players Era Festival. And there's already talks about having an MTE in Dubai next year. I think it has been confirmed to be said, and there will be multiple Power 5 programs heading to Dubai to play in that next feast week. But I just think that I think I'm at a point where I just am more so against these MTEs. I think, yes, it does draw the allure from programs wanting to come and compete and play for incentives like NIL, the $1 million that they get for the program. But at the same time, it just, you look in the boat of teams who maybe went 0-3 in an MTE like Players Era. Or, I think back last year to as a UConn fan of Maui, it's just so tough when you pick up 3 straight losses to have to. It places such a higher level of importance in your play throughout the course of the rest of the season, because picking up 3 losses in 3 nights is definitely sets you at a disadvantage for sure going forward as the season goes on. And I think it's better for the sport to see more of the home and home series. just the agreed upon matchups at neutral sites. I think it's better for the sport. I think the schools make more money doing it that way as well. Especially with home and homes when you can have these big time games on your on campus arenas. And I just think overall, I'm not completely against players era, but I do think that they do need to change the formatting going to next year. But overall, I think we got some good games out of it. We got some big time performances, and Michigan, of course, really solidified their spot as one of the top teams in the sport.
Definitely, definitely. There is definitely a question on beyond what the MTs have provided in general. Because Feast Week this year was decent, but there were better moments in other years. I think Maui itself was the biggest hit, although it had its own
Yeah.
surprises in itself. Congrats to USC and Seton Hall for looking like very good teams right now. But I think in the future, we really, as a fan base, at least for college basketball, really need to look into how we're going to view these because I don't know where this goes. There's already talk about there being a big time tournament next year in Dubai, which I'm personally not a fan of. There's no reason to leave the country at this point for things like these. And
Yeah.
Maui was already that very far off experience, but I like where this possible thing is going for players there. I expect it to be an even bigger and even more important thing next year, but I want the consistency and I want the fan support because there was not a lot of fan support. It is Vegas, but it's not like Maui or Bahamas, so it's not crazy to get out there. But it just didn't. It felt very corporate, and that's a big concern for me right now.
Yeah, definitely. I hear you out on your point there. Love the Maui shot, by the way. That field going in did not look great, but it ended up producing some of the best games of Feast Week. Seton Hall went on a nice run. NC State honestly disappointed in Maui, but USC took it home. Shout out Chad Baker Mazara, back-to-back Maui champ. But let's get into the ACC SEC challenge. The ACC overall won more games in that series against the SEC. But there was definitely some really well played out matchups in that series. Syracuse took home a huge upset win against Tennessee at the JMA Wireless Dome. Now should still be the Carrier Dome, but that's another story. Duke took home a really close win at Cameron Indoor against Florida. They were up big. Florida made a big run back to get back in the game, I should say. Boogie Flan kind of for the first time this year in a high marquee matchup, got it going. UNC Kentucky was good as well, went down to the wire. UNC took home the win. I think overall the games in the series between the ACC and the SEC in that challenge were really good. I think I took away probably, I think the most good for Florida in that matchup was seeing them play that well against a top five team and then following that up with their performance last night against UConn. Of course, they lost both of those games, but to see them hang in there with top five teams where they probably haven't gotten off to the start that they wanted to, I think it's important to know that they still have a ceiling of being a really good team down the road. Kentucky, man, Kentucky looks rough. It looks rough in Lexington right now.
Yeah, it's horrible. I do feel for Kentucky fans that really thought Mark Pope, and personally, I thought Mark Pope was going to be a really big growth aspect for Kentucky in the post-Cal era. This is a slump beyond a slump. Kentucky has not even looked remotely close. They don't have any quad one wins. They just can't seem to get the opportunities when they want. And they've had good opportunities. They had a near home game against a decent Gonzaga squad. They had UNC on the ropes for most of their game in Rupp in the ACC SEC Challenge, and they lost both of those games. They could not stay functioning against Louisville early in the season. There has not been consistency. Otega Owe has not been stepping up, and I think the injuries to Quaidens and Jalen Lowe beyond anything else have been the biggest problems. And when you look at all this is a $20 million trash can. That is such a shame to watch, and I feel like Kentucky fans are going to have Mark Pope on his head. I just don't know what they can do from here. It's going to be rough to make the tournament, which is a complete shock for a lot of Wildcat fans.
Yeah, being the head coach of Kentucky is a high pressure job, and it's very clear it's gotten Mark Pope. And Mark Pope's had the press conference where he came out and said, "I wish I was further along this group than where I am." He came out very recently, might have been yesterday, maybe the day before, where he said, "I firmly still believe that we'll be a good team this year." But right now, it doesn't look that way. There's just really no offensive identity whatsoever. They're not the greatest defensive team either. Otega Owe, like you mentioned, has been a disappointment to start the season. And again, this is what I talked about in the offseason. I know we caught a lot of flack on this channel from like Big Blue Nation about just our doubts about Kentucky this year. I just don't think that you have really any form of connectivity between the guys on your roster right now. There's a lack of effort that's been very evident, especially in their game against Gonzaga following the ACC SEC challenge against UNC. And to lose both those games at Rupp, where you really shouldn't lose if you're Kentucky, it's definitely put Kentucky at a real setback position. I don't know how Mark Pope is going to figure it out. I think that's a concern where right now you're kind of seeing teams that went out and spent a lot in the portal. Between Kentucky, between St. John's, went out. Both those programs went out and got some of the more marquee names in the transfer portal this offseason. And a lot of people thought that they were going to be really good going into the year. Yes, they have talented players, but they need to fit together. And I kind of look at Kentucky right now. I was telling Josh off recording before we start today that Kentucky this year reminds me of Kansas of last year, where you kind of have the similarities in going out and getting the marquee transfers. And then again, good players, but they need to fit together. You have a lot of guys that are used to having the ball in their hands every possession, and it's not that way anymore. You need to be able to fill a role. I think probably the best player for Kentucky to start this year has been Denzel Aberdeen. And even then, he really only had one great shooting game, and that was against Louisville, which they ended up losing that game as well. And it makes you think, man, I wonder with the struggles that the Florida guards have had, Denzel Aberdeen probably made the wrong choice. He probably should have stuck it out in Gainesville and ran it back.
I 100% agree with you. It really is a big shame, too. And just for the SEC as a whole, which I think was another big sign from the ACC SEC Challenge, where last year they won, I think, 12-2. And this year they actually lost, I think, 8-7 or 8-6. So there has been a big shakeup in the SEC as a whole, and it's showing obviously Kentucky. Florida's in a really bad spot too right now. They're not as bad as Kentucky, but they're 5-4, which is not the thing you want. They've had close losses to, like we said, before, Duke and UConn as of last night from today's recording. And there hasn't really been a team that's stepped up in the SEC. I get it, Vanderbilt's undefeated, and they look like the best team so far. They had a great feast week and a great ACC SEC matchup with SMU, but I'm not fully there on them. For example, I do feel like Bama is probably the best team right now. If they win against Arizona, that would solidify it. But as of right now, like, there are sneaky good teams. Arkansas is pretty sneaky good, but there's no team I feel like could win a 1 seed in the SEC this year. This conference feels very much in the gutter from the past.
Yeah, you mentioned Arkansas. I think right now is another good point to talk about some of the other games that followed on that following Wednesday in the ACC SEC Challenge. We had Louisville, Arkansas. Arkansas took home the win. NC State took a loss to Auburn. I think Louisville and NC State are two ACC teams that have really surprised both me and Josh in a bad way to start the year. Louisville, of course, picked up the win in the in-state rivalry against Kentucky, but the way that game has aged with how bad Kentucky's been since then, that doesn't look like the greatest win the way it looked when they originally got it. And I got to say, I'm definitely concerned if I'm Louisville. I don't think they're there defensively right now. I still think that they have shortfalls offensively as well. You know, Mikel Brown's been a little streaky to start this year. And then NC State has really been shocking in the worst ways possible. I expected them to, honestly, I think they were my pick going into the Maui Invitational to win it, and they did not play well whatsoever. And then they dropped the following game to Auburn, who Auburn has been up and down to start the year, but that was most definitely a winnable game for NC State. And, I have a lot of concerns surrounding those two ACC programs, specifically Louisville. That was a team I picked to win the ACC going into the year, but now it's looking like Duke might cakewalk through the conference.
Yeah, it like I said before, it's not looking good for the SEC. The ACC, though, does look nice. Syracuse looks like to be in a good situation. Notre Dame actually as a bubble team. I know they didn't have the great performance in players there, but they had a good win against TCU. Outside of ACC, SEC, I should say, Virginia's now ranked. Virginia Tech looks bubbly. Obviously, Duke looks like the best thing in the whole wide world, and they are currently my number one team. I'll probably speak more on that later. And to say anything, at least, I really feel like the conferences have had a very big alignment or realignment over these past few weeks. And the ACC is a top 2, possibly top 3 conference as of right now. And the SEC definitely on the lower end as time has gone on.
Yeah, and another ACC team played last night in the Jimmy V Classic, which we'll be giving you guys our takeaways for that starting now. First game of the night at Madison Square Garden saw Clemson and BYU go down to the final seconds where Rob Wright sunk really just a prayer 3 that he threw up with the game tied, took home the win to beating the buzzer to take home the win. Definitely a game that BYU probably had no business in winning, considering they were down, 22 points at one one point of the game. Regardless, though, it goes to show how talented and how NBA level some of the players on that BYU roster is. But at the same time, this kind of goes back to our takeaways following the BYU UConn game, where yes, you have NBA level players and you kind of run an NBA style offense, which is very isolation based. But at the same time, I just don't know if that play style is sustainable in college basketball. And I don't really know how it translates. And being able to win a lot of your higher marquee matchups and being able to go deep into the NCAA tournament. It twice in both the UConn game and against Clemson, they were able to hit shots down the stretch to make it interesting against the Huskies, and then ultimately take home the win against Clemson. But you play a team that just, really plays with a lot of tenacity, wire to wire, then it's going to be tough for BYU to win those types of games. And I think that, again, it's not sustainable. Kevin Young, I like him as a coach, but I think they need to run more offense. I really do. Maybe that's just something that falls on Rob Wright, not being a good enough college point guard to be able to execute offense the way Kevin Young might want to. And he's kind of just deferred to letting his really good isolation players between Devonta, Wright himself, and then Richie Saunders, who can obviously get it going. He's just kind of deferred to them and just hoping that they make shots.
Yeah, I don't really know what to think about this game still. It's a great game. It's a great game. I personally thought it was over after half, and I regret my decision heavily. I kind of wish I saw the rest of this game. I like Clemson more in this regardless. I think this is a still big boost for them as a team. Brad Burnell has once again cooked. A guy who I didn't even see pushing his team into the bubble conversation has worked their way into being a second away from being ranked, basically. That's kind of where I'm at with this squad. They still definitely can get that later on, but I like your point, Kanaye, on BYU. It just, you can't do this every single time. Like, this is something that if it happens again, I wouldn't be shocked if they just lose by 30 at that point. Like, you can expect a lot from Debansa, and I feel like this team has the youth and the agility that can outrun a lot of squads, and they are a second half team. That's the thing I've been noticing now between this win and their loss against UConn, where they've played far better in the second half than the first half, but they need to be consistent because they have to compete, like I said before, against Iowa State, Houston, Arizona, Texas Tech.
Right.
Like, the Big 12 is not going to be light for them, and they can't afford to be down 10 to 15 points at halftime because you're just not going to win those games.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I think, Debat's a really good player, definitely worth taking with the number one overall pick if you are an NBA GM. But, I think he's got to get off to better starts. And, against UConn, he got off to a slow start. Granted, better second half. Same deal last night. I think he only had 6 of his 28 points in the first half and then had the following 22 in the second, which is good. You got a closer in Devonta. But at the same time, that team needs to get off to better starts, and you can't afford to go down 20 like you did against your two probably biggest games of your non-conference schedule in UConn and Clemson. And you're going to play some really top flight teams in the Big 12, like you mentioned, Arizona, Houston, Iowa State. And I don't see those teams letting up the way that maybe UConn did at TD Garden or the way Clemson did last night. And granted, I know Clemson did blow the lead, but I still take away a lot of good for them to see how Justin Porter played in this game. RJ Godfrey's been a good surprise for Clemson to start the year. Nick Davidson, I know, didn't have the greatest night, but he's also a good player for them too. And I think Clemson definitely has a chance to make some noise in the ACC this year. So overall, it is unfortunate they blew that big of a lead, but I still think to consider that they put up that many points, they were able to take that big of a lead against what is a top 10 team right now. I think there's a lot of good to take out of that.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you on that point. And it's still a hard game to really understand because it's just, you don't see games like that ever. I think that's one of the games you just have to respect for pure entertainment. Like, I wish I saw the rest of that one. That's the most I can say. But I think the next game, though, between Florida and UConn is a real talking point that can really decide a lot of things going ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to start as a non-UConn fan here, I'll let you. I'm curious to hear.
Thanks. I wanted to personally, from the UConn standpoint, this is that season for them. I love it, and I know you're going to say it, but I love how Solo Bowl had this game down as a revenge game. I know how Hurley works. I think we all kind of do now. This man does everything he can to seek revenge, and especially against a Florida team that owned them last year in the tournament, and a team that could have had a very good opportunity to bounce back into SEC play and to bounce back into the top 10 with that win. UConn denies that opportunity. And it is one of those games where you have to stick to the end for. Florida made it very close to the end. They were down to that last possession. They had an unfortunate 5-second violation on the court line, which that's a bit of a shame. The foul calls in them may have been a little iffy, but personally for UConn, this is everything you wanted. Mullins played, he did foul out, but Reed had a great start to the game. He had a near double-double, so that's a very good sign. And honestly, that's a 1 seed. That's a 1 seed. The Big East is not looking good right now. There might be one other team in there. I feel like they pick up at most 2 losses in the Big East. This team is very, very strongly in the case for the national championship. And I think a lot of people are kind of ignoring them as of right now. And for Florida's point, just don't know. Like I said it earlier, they're in a spot like Kentucky. They have 4 losses. They're not horrible as a team. This is definitely not the team that's going to win national championship again. But I think the consistency is just not there. Like Boogie Flan had a good game against Duke. He has a horrible game against UConn. Xavier Lee has his best game. He actually looked great. That was a beautiful, beautiful sign for Gator fans who were praying that he was going to be actually a good player, and he's finally starting to grow into the position, but he wasn't there for Duke. Condon was all right. Howe was great. Howe has been the only consistent bright spot on this team.
He might be a first team
And he
All-American.
honestly should be a first team All American. I agree with you, Kanaye. But outside of that, this team doesn't have a lot of consistency. And it's going to cause them a lot of big issues. I feel like the issues on the shooting is bad because Chinulu has just not been there in full. He missed all 4 of his free throw attempts, for example. That's just not something you want to have in a game where you are shooting a lot more free throws than UConn. And the shooting wasn't there either. UConn made a lot more threes, which is a consistent thing with UConn. UConn is a great 3-point shooting team this season, and you need to back it up by shooting your own threes. That's kind of how it's going to be working for playing against UConn, and Florida couldn't do that. They made 6 threes all game. It was very minimal.
Yeah, I guess to start with UConn, a lot of these points you guys will see if you are a Husky fan on the Saturdays and Stores podcast slated for this upcoming Saturday. I'll recap both the Florida game and then what is to transpire in the Texas game on Friday night. So definitely be on the lookout for that if you are a Husky fan. But I think this was an important win. Of course, you mentioned the revenge on the mind of Hurley, Solo Ball, Alex Caravan, Terrace Reed, 3 guys that were on last year's team, and unfortunately were part of that loss that they suffered in the second round to Florida last year. And I got to give Todd Golden a lot of credit because I think the way it looked going into the year, you might have argued Florida's roster looked better on paper. I wouldn't push back too much against that going into the year. I perhaps maybe even thought so. But I think UConn's in a way kind of it made more sense in how the pieces were going to fit together. But Todd Golden, I think the game plan he drew up offensively and just wanting to put Terrace Reed and Eric Riba. Of course, Eric Riba is a freshman. Terrace Reed probably only played at 75% last night. Just putting those guys in as many ball screen actions as they possibly could have to be able to get Xavier Lee downhill. And Xavier Lee, I think, is important for him. I'll touch more on that in a second from the Florida angle. Again, a lot of credit goes to Todd Golden for that. I think UConn did good in getting Ruben Chinilu in ball screen actions offensively. And I think to win a game where you kind of got to win with your defense, a game where the free throw differential was definitely tilted in Florida's favor, a game where your 5-star freshman Braylon Mullins is in foul trouble, your starting point guard Silas Demery's in foul trouble, Terrace Reed, of course, 75% like I mentioned, he got into foul trouble at one point in the game too. I just think it was definitely telling to see UConn really hold their ground when Florida went on that run when it was 11-6 in UConn's favor and then flipped immediately to 17-11 in Florida's favor. I think seeing that not wavering them or not really, shaking them all too much. And then that run Florida kind of went on to start the second half. Definitely didn't throw UConn off all too much either as they were able to kind of come back. I think there were opportunities for the UConn to really blow the game wide open. And they probably should have won this game by more. You also got to execute your inbounding against the press a lot better than what I saw last night. But overall, I think pulling out a gutsy win like that at MSG is definitely big time. And you had to win that game just considering, like you mentioned, Josh, the Big East is looking really weak right now. It's not going to be too many more opportunities to win quad one games once you get into league play. So I think overall, really big win for UConn. From the Florida angle, I think Xavier Lee was definitely the biggest takeaway for me. Houck has been the one consistent factor for the Gators this year, like you talked about. He definitely is in the running to be a first-team All-American, the way I see it. Xavier Lee, though, Boogie Flan, they have not gotten consistent play out of those 2 guards whatsoever. I think, in 2 back-to-back games now, we've seen Boogie Flan have a good game, Xavier Lee struggle, and Boogie Flan really just was completely a non-factor due to the foul trouble he was in. Really didn't play much in last night's game because of that. And Xavier Lee was finally really able to get it going against the top flight opponent. So I think that's so important for the confidence that Xavier has. He talked about how it was really in a dark place with the start that he's had to the year. He's still not shooting a great percentage from the floor, nor from three. But I think he talked about trying to find his joy and kind of getting back to understanding why he loves playing for basketball, why he chose to play for Florida, playing games like he did last night in the Jimmy V Classic. Having a performance like that, I should say, I think that's huge for his confidence going forward. I don't know that it is going to get there at any point this season, but if they can find any ounce of consistency out of their backcourt between Xavier and Boogie, then Florida has a chance to be good this year. I don't think they are a Final Four contender right now for me, but they could definitely make noise in the SEC if those two guys can get it going. I'd like to maybe see more Linus or Urban Clavzar alongside either Boogie or Xavier, whoever is running the point between the two. And I'd like to see a little more consistency out of Condon offensively. And, Chinny Lou, you're not going to get much out of him on that side of the ball. So overall, it's really going to come down to guard play for Florida. Those guards are really going to dictate how far that Gators team can go this year.
No, I definitely agree with you. One thing, like we've kind of mentioned a few times now, the SEC is looking very weak in comparison to last year, and Florida has the opportunities and they have the weapons. It's just we're just not so sure right now. And they've looked great. UConn, Arizona, and Duke are all likely 1 seeds. And they didn't have bad losses, any of them. None of them were teams or games that felt too far to reach. They were only a few possessions behind on most occasions. And if you're going to ask me if they had won even one of those games in comparison, it's good. I get the TCU loss is not something you want to even speak about if you're a Gator fan, but TCU doesn't even look horribly horrible, and they bounced back very well against Providence. So I don't know. I feel like this team definitely could win the SEC. I'm leaning towards it right now, especially if Bama does not beat Arizona on Saturday. But this is not looking like a championship team. This is not how you want to start your season, non-conference, conference, whatever it may be. And I don't know how the turnaround is going to be because they get a 4 seed at highest. That's kind of where I'm at right now. And it's a big shame because you have great players in Condon and Howe. Those are guys that are not going to be sticking around next year. Flan and Xavier Lee are in that same boat most likely as well. So this team really was there to win it. The chips were on the board, and it's really blowing up in Todd Golden's face, and that's a shame to see.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, again, it's so tough to replace what you had from last year, going back to Walter Clayton Jr., who was probably the clutchest player in Florida history. Of course, Elijah Martin, Will Richards, two just great additional lead guards to have alongside Walter. It's tough to replace that. This is normal in college basketball. You're not supposed to just reload right away and just run through the country. There's going to be growing pains. We know this. We know how hard it is for transfer guards, freshman guards to come in and immediately grasp how to run offense in a new system immediately. We're seeing that right now from the UConn side with Silas Demery. He's not really at that point right now, which is what I think kind of elevates UConn's ceiling. I firmly believe Silas will get there at some point in the season. I think that'll take UConn to the next level. But going back to Florida, if Xavier and Boogie can come along as the season progresses, then Florida is going to be in a good spot to compete for an SEC title. But in terms of Final Four, I think right now that might be off the table.
Yeah, it's just a rough thing to see right now. And if you are an SEC fan, I do feel bad for you. You have your college football, don't get me wrong. But after last year, it really felt like college basketball was becoming the SEC's big thing. And there are currently, other than Vanderbilt, no undefeated teams in the SEC. There are no teams in KenPom that are overly seen. I feel like the AP poll is being nice on them as well, at times even. So it's just not looking good. I would say that, however, if you're looking at other conferences, the Big 12 looks great, the Big 10 looks great, and the ACC have been the big three. And those are the conferences and the teams in there that I really hope to see more of with their gameplay later on in the month and the rest of the season.
Yeah, but now I think is a good time to get into what is our updated Final Fours. Of course, it's been a good while since we've talked about who we have going to the Final Four on this podcast, and I think more than ever right now is a good time before everything probably continues to get even crazier. Josh, I'll ask you first. What are the 4 teams you see going to Indianapolis this year right now?
No, I will say, as a group, this is our first Final Four of this current season. We had our last one on recording on October 7th, I had from last time Purdue, which I had winning that championship, Illinois, Kentucky, which I now very regret, and Houston. I am taking off every team on that list but Illinois. And even then, I kind of need to explain why. First, I feel like Illinois, despite the losses to UConn and I think it was Alabama, they have looked very strong. It's just if you can get the Balkan Five running in the way that they want to be. They have a top five offense in my minds, and they've shown it well. It's just that in the games they've lost, they've been horrific from the 3 point line. But they take so many shots. They're one of the best shot taking 3 point teams in the country, and they get a lot of open shots too, which I've been making them, and they have not been playing the defense we've expected. I don't know if the defense can be fixed, but 3 point shooting definitely can, and I probably will be fixed going into conference play. They still have a lot of good talent on this team and good games to up their resume going into Big Ten as well. And I always feel like this team was going to be an outsider. I feel like this team would have been a 4 or 5 seed that was just going to crash the bracket and find their way to the Final Four. So that's kind of where I have them. I also kind of have Arkansas in that similar fold. They're another team I feel like is going to be a Final Four squad. And this is not to necessarily say that Coach Cal can lead a team to the Final Four again. He obviously has the experience more than enough now. But this Arkansas team feels a lot more compact than originally thought. I like both the freshmen and Malik Thomas and what's the other one's name?
Darius
Yeah,
Jacob.
Darius Jacob. I think they both play a strong role. And, typically your freshman-led team is just one good freshman. Cam Boozer, Cooper Flag. You can name as many as you like, but having two equally good freshmen, that's unique. You don't see that very often. And I feel like that's a very key thing to have when you're trying to win a national championship or go to a Final Four. I also have UConn in this bracket as well, in this Final Four. I feel like they're just very dominant. It's very hard to not choose them at the moment. I feel like there's nothing really stopping them. And Hurley's been to the mountaintop and back like as recently as 2 years ago. It's hard to keep that man away from any good Final Four. And if they're going to be a 1 seed, they're going to have a very easy path there. And I get the Big East is not strong, but they've shown in non-conference. They've played some of the best teams and they've won some of the best games. I'm really not worried about them too much. I get the Arizona loss was a bit of a problem, but that was without Terrace Reed and Braylon Mullins, so I don't think that was a big deal. They're probably going to pick up one more loss all season to St. John's. Tell me that's not a Final Four team right there. But my national champion, I alluded to it. My last Final Four team is Duke. I think they are the number one team as of today. I don't really have many other words to describe how insanely good and how potent Cam Boozer is. He is running away with National Player of the Year. That is just insane to say out loud. I didn't think he was going to be a guy for it. He was outside of our top five, if I'm not wrong, when we started the season. And he crept his way in and has now become a long shot, that top guy. Like Braden Smith is not keeping up. Lendenborg, top enough, fallen off personally. There's nothing really stopping him from winning the award. And as a whole, Duke looks great. Their win against Michigan State completely changed my mind. I thought they were going to get crushed in that game personally. They kept it going. They kept the beat going. The 3 point shooting is great. The ability to defend it at a consistent ratio is great. Like they made sure Florida lost that game. I'll say that as much. Like they were not going to let the Gators magically win in Cameron Indoor that one time. So if you're gonna ask me, I'm choosing Duke. This is a lot like last year's Duke team. Like I'm gonna end up regretting my words by saying this, but part of me actually feels like this team is better than last year's.
I don't think that's crazy to say. I also have Duke in my Final Four. I'll begin talking about them. I think they're probably my number one overall seed going into the NCAA tournament. I really do believe that they're going to run through the ACC, and I think they will be Michigan in that kind of random out of conference game that they play in. What is it, February against Michigan? But nonetheless, I think that this team isn't necessarily better than last year's Duke team, but I think they're better coached. Where I think Shire's done some reflecting, and I think he's kind of took the Demons head on. Last year he could not win a close game. They've already won two close games now, and you have a closer in Cam Boozer. Where, by the way, I hate the narrative that he's not going to translate into the NBA. He can step out, hit the three. He's a dominant post presence. He makes the right reads when they are in a closing situation. Where twice now they put Cam Boozer in a ball screen action. He's made the right read. Pass out to Isaiah Evans for the game-winning three against Florida. Pass it out to the game sealing three to Caleb Foster against Michigan State to win both those games. And speaking of Caleb Foster, I think this Duke team can get better as the season goes on. That's kind of a parallel across both Duke and UConn, who I also have in my Final Four, and I'll touch on in a second, where I think both those teams, they're nowhere near finished products right now. And as good as they have been to start this season, I think they could get even better. And we're by the time we get to January, February, March, they're going to be a lot better than what they are currently performing as up to this point. And I think, again, you really have everything you need with Duke in terms of just positional size. They're so good defensively. When they get going on that end, they're so hard to score on. Cam Boozer, of course, like we've talked about several times now, National Player of the Year right now, front runner, isn't even close. Pat Ngangba has been really good in the post. Nicholas Kamania has been good in his role. Dame Sarr has also been good in his minutes off the bench. And you're starting to get consistent play out of Caleb Foster, and that's what we've been looking for out of him for the last 3 years now. And he's finally starting to do it. Caden Boozer's a good change of pace guard who brings good size and defense when he does come off the bench for Caleb. And overall, I think the only thing that can really hold Duke back this year might be Shire. But the way it looks up to this point, Shire looks like he's done a lot of he's switched some things up in how he coaches, and I think that's going to pay dividends and already has for Duke this year. In terms of UConn, similar to Duke, I think they're nowhere near a finished product in terms of how good they have a chance to be. Like we talked about now, they have been healthy to start this year. They've missed key guys between Terrace Reed, Braylon Mullins. Both those guys are just finally starting to return into the fold, and they're both very clearly just not really there yet. Terrace Reed really has only played at 75% last night. I think he was really only at maybe 50% when he played against Illinois a couple weeks back. You get him healthy, that brings a whole new dimension to what he can do. He's a post presence, a guy you can throw the ball to and hopefully chalk up his 2 points or a trip to the free throw line. Braylon Mullins, I think he's had really good moments, which is definitely important considering you are a freshman who is going to be playing an important role on this team. With the job he did at Fall Allen Fieldhouse and what it was only a second collegiate game and having the 17 points, hitting the 2 free throws to seal the game, following it up with 10-point performance against East Texas A&M. And even though he was in the foul trouble last night against Florida, I think the minutes he played off the bench in the second half were just really important and kind of got UConn going on the run to eventually take the lead, which led to them keeping that lead for really the rest of the game. I just think that's so important. I think he's he's a player, man. I think he's really gonna do a lot of good for this UConn program. And then Silas Demery, I think, is by far one of the biggest factors. Like I talked about on the Saturdays and Stores podcast and briefly today, he's not where he needs to be just yet. But Dan Hurley said he thinks Silas is further along than Tristan Newton was in his first year as a Husky. So that I think speaks to a lot about where Silas is, and the effort's there, the non-negotiable stuff, playing defense, playing with effort. It's all there with Silas, and it's all about just knowing what to do and when. And I think he will get there. And then again, the shooters on UConn, they haven't shot great to start the year. Solo has been up and down. I think finally he's started to kind of get it going. Maybe it's because he started to wear the shooting sleeve after that talk with Ray Allen. So maybe that's what you can attribute that to. And Braylon Mullins, of course, he hasn't shot great to start the year, but I'm sure we'll see some big shooting nights out of him down the road. My other 2 teams in the Final Four, I have Arizona and I also have Iowa State. I had a tough time going back and forth between Arizona and Michigan. I just think with Michigan, I'm not there. Like I talked about at the beginning of the episode, I'm not completely sold on believing this shooting is sustainable over the course of the entire year. I worry they're peaking at the wrong time. I slightly worry that with Arizona as well, but I just feel like you need closers to win in March. Jaden Bradley is arguably the best closer in the sport right now. He's played at a first-team All-American level. That's a guy I trust probably more than anyone else right now in the country to go and get a bucket when you need one. Koa Pete's been outstanding. He'll be a lottery pick. Krivas has been just great down low as a rim protector and what he's provided on the offensive glass. Anthony Delorso, of course, one of the best movement shooters in the country. And I think, arguably he should be starting for them just considering Burries did not have the greatest start to the season. But overall, I think Arizona, their depth might be a slight concern, but I think in the front court, they're fine with Toby Awaka and Krivas. In the guard room, though, it could get a little dicey depth-wise, but they might not need to go more than 7 deep in the NCAA tournament. So I think overall their defense is great. I think the shooting is probably the one thing I'd point to as their biggest weakness, but I think Delorso can help remedy that. I think Jaden Bradley's shot making down the stretch in games is definitely going to remedy that as well. And then as for Iowa State, I think that team they have so much experience between Taman Lipsey, Joshua Jefferson, Mom Silovich. Those are all guys who have been there 3+ years under TJ Otzelberger. And I mean, you already know what they are as a defense, and the offense is there this year. I think those guys, that 3-headed monster, or their big 3, I should say, they've all taken a big step forward. And Again, TJ doesn't have the greatest track record in March, but I think that could change this year, and I could see the Cyclones get into Indianapolis.
No, I like that list as well. It's a really good one. Did you have any team like just outside the list? Because for me, I had a really strong choice that I did
Yeah,
use.
I mean, there's a couple. Of course, you got to throw Michigan in there. Just the way they've looked. Again, I really do like this Michigan team a lot, and I'm not trying to slight them in any way whatsoever. I just don't know if I believe that they could keep up what they've done. And then the other two, I think that I probably would have, maybe even three, are like Houston, Gonzaga, and Michigan State. I like Michigan State a lot. It's just the lack of shooting, and shot making in big games. They really struggled in shooting the ball against Duke. That just worries me a lot. Of course, defensively they're there. You know how Tom Izzo coaches his program, but I just don't know if they have enough shot making. Gonzaga, I don't think you write Gonzaga off completely after them getting routed by Michigan. As just a bad game for them and a really, really good game for Michigan. I think they could definitely be there in the second weekend this year without a doubt. And then Houston, I think that similar to UConn and Duke, I think the freshmen elevate the ceiling of Houston, where Houston doesn't look maybe as good as we thought they'd be to start the season, but as they progress and the freshmen get more and more experience, Kingston Fleming's already looks like a stud. Kristen Nack has had moments. But if you're able to get those freshmen going consistently, that just skyrockets what this Houston program ceiling can be. You combine that with the returns they have of Manuel Sharp, Miles Uzan, JoJo Tugler, then they definitely have full opportunity to get back to a national championship game.
Yeah, I can definitely. I like a lot of those points there. The thing for me was I was stuck between Arkansas and Michigan, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
know a lot of people consistently would choose Michigan, but I feel like you mentioned before, they're peaking a little too early. I think this team is going to run into a few losses. They're likely a 2, 3 seed. I'm not like going to say they're horrible, but this team is not as convincingly strong as you might assume. They have the best 4 wins in a row of any team right now, and any team for quite a while. Their KenPom is out of this world, but that's not going to be consistent. You can't expect that much. And if Lendenborg, who just hasn't been the real deal just yet, and I don't know if that's a just yet or just for the whole season at this point, because we're already like a third of the way through. I don't know. I feel like there's too many questions to make on it, and I don't trust Dusty May to make it back in his second year at Michigan. He has that experience at FAU, don't get me wrong, but I I think it really does take a lot more than it looks for Michigan to make it there.
I think one thing with Michigan is, but they are definitely a top five defensive team in the country, but they are number one per KenPom currently. I just think that up to this point that they haven't necessarily played any teams with a lot of perimeter firepower. Like they played Gonzaga, but Gonzaga is really post-centric between Graham Ike and Braden Huff. I think once you play a team that has three, four guys, maybe even that are just, have a lot of firepower on the perimeter, can take guys off the dribble, can shoot the ball, space the floor. That's going to draw Addy Mara. That's going to draw Merez Johnson out on the perimeter, where they're probably not as comfortable guarding the way Yaxel might be, just because I feel Yaxel's pretty positionless. And I don't think that they have the greatest perimeter defense among their guard room. I think Namari Burnett, Roddy Gay are solid, but Ellie Cadeau is not really a plus defender. Trey McKenney's not really a plus defender as well. And I think, you play a team that has three or four guys, maybe like in Iowa State, with between Taman, Joshua and Milan, those guys can space the floor out and be able to kind of open things up, open the driving lanes when you pull Merez or Ade out of the paint. Then I think that could be a tough matchup for Michigan. And I think, come tournament time, they're going to have to probably face a team that has three or four guards or guys on the perimeter who can take guys one-on-one and just space the floor out, force the bigs out of the painted area, and just, make it a tough matchup for Michigan.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I also think Gonzaga, mentioned you gave out, they're in a similar boat, I would say, to Michigan. I just don't know. It's the classic question of, does the WCC prepare Gonzaga well? It never
Right,
does.
right.
But Mark Few has that experience as one of his last year's coaching, most likely. So I can see it in that way. And beyond that, I do want to give a slight shout out to Michigan State. They have looked the part despite that one game against Duke, and that's also a national champion team right now. So it wouldn't be shocking to have both of them in the Final Four. But I feel like the shooting consistency is always the concern there. But it's Izzo and March, and I feel like that's enough I need to say on their
Yeah, yeah.
case.
Most definitely. But I think that's going to wrap up everything we had for you guys on this weekly podcast. Hopefully, you guys will be getting more videos slightly more consistently than what they've been. Now that winter break is here, me and Josh are going to be able to get more stuff out to you guys. But really great continuation to what was a great start to the season. And things are really ramping up. Top teams in the sport have kind of separated themselves, and we definitely got some juggernauts to watch out for as we get closer and closer to March. But until the next episode, we'll see you all next time.